Okay, I'm gonna start. I think we've got quite a few people here. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Greening. I'm the Children's and YA selector, a specialist here at Whitehots. Thank you all for joining us today for our Demystifying Decodable Books webinar. I just want everyone to know that any questions you have, you can submit them into the chat, the Zoom chat, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. And I'm very happy to introduce Jill Lauren, creator of Whole Phonics. Jill brings over 40 years of teaching experience working with beginning and reluctant struggling readers and has dedicated her career to help children build strong literacy foundations. Through Whole Phonics, she's created engaging, research-based decodable books and materials that make learning both exciting and fun. Please join me in welcoming Jill Lauren.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you to White Hots for having me. And I'm going to pop up my presentation and share my screen. And here we go. So it's so nice to be here. This is such an important topic to me. So I'm honored to have an opportunity to share, what are decodable books? Let's demystify them. And I'd like to start by just telling you a little bit about myself and why I am in the position to be able to talk to you about decodable text. So I started teaching reading, kids how to read over 40 years ago. I was well trained right out of university, and teaching kids how to read has been really the most fulfilling career. Along the way, the books that were available to me to help my students learn how to read, I found to be rather dull. So did my students, and so did the teachers that I encountered in teacher training. So I set out to make my own around 20 years ago, and then they were so well received by my students that I decided to publish them. Now, through publishing a different set of books, I attended an ALA convention, and I met a number of librarians who I have remained in close contact with to this day. This was all the way back since like the early 2000s. And I just want to share. One in particular asked me to write a chapter about dyslexia in the library in this book called Disabilities and the Library. And in order to write that chapter, I interviewed about 100 librarians across the US. And every time I had a conversation, by the time I hung up the phone, I felt like I had chills. The commitment of librarians to making sure that all children have a book that they can read and enjoy, that idea of a book for every child is so it's so profound, and it's such a phenomenal driving force for librarians. So it is such a joy to be able to talk to you, because I feel like as you learn more about decodable books, you will see how that concept of a book for every child is even going to be, you'll have more tools in your toolbox to make sure that every child does indeed have a book. So we'll get started. So today we're going to talk about the why and how of it. Why choose decodable books? How do we choose them? And how do we share them with the patrons? So we have to take a step back, and, it's funny, I was sharing with the White Hots folks before we all got on that in that chapter of the book that I just showed you, which was I finished in 2018, I don't even talk about decodable books for reluctant and dyslexic and striving readers. That's how, new this idea of shelving decodable texts in a library system is. So considering I've been using them my entire life and I didn't even talk about them in that chapter, that's how new it is for libraries. So I want to talk about why is it new? Why are we talking about it now? And it all comes back to this like tug of war that's been going on about how we teach reading. And, tug of war is this delightful game until it's not. And, when adults play it, especially in the world of education, it becomes what we call the reading wars. And that's what's been happening really in many English speaking countries for the last 30 to 40 years as we've gone back and forth with different philosophies about how we teach reading. So, what's been happening prior to about the last 5 years is that there was this emphasis on something called whole language or balanced literacy. And that concept took hold in really in the 1970s to 1980s, really became popular. And it was this idea that children learn to read as naturally as they learn to speak. Boy, is that appealing. Just put a book in front of a child and they'll start picking it up naturally. Well, we know if that was true, then everyone would be reading. So that is illogical. Um, there was also this idea that, hey, let's have kids use picture cues to help them learn how to read. Well, having some cues is a great idea until you get to a point in your reading career that there are no pictures, and then what? And then finally, that children should use the first sound of a word and guess based on context. And yes, you can do that maybe when you're little and you have strong language skills. But again, as reading becomes more complex, that is a strategy that will not serve you well. So the other side of the reading wars was this idea that called structured literacy, and I'm actually trying to remove my bar here of everybody. So layout. Hold on one moment. I'm just so I can read this. Okay. Okay, thank you. So the first point being that children must be directly taught with structured literacy. Children must be directly taught the alphabetic code of our written language and how it corresponds to spoken language. And we will get into that in this discussion because that relates directly to decodable text. And then secondly, that this instruction must be carefully sequenced, and we'll be speaking about that too. Okay. So I'm going to read this. Perfect. Okay. So the research that is driving what I'm going to be discussing with you today has been around really since the 1970s. When I went to university in the early 1980s, I learned this research about the importance of making sure that children understand how the sounds in our spoken language correspond to print. And these researchers, Lieberman and Schenkweiler, speak to that when they write that learning to read and write depends on abilities that are language related, but that go beyond the ordinary abilities required for speaking and listening. Research has shown that the success of learners, whether they're children or adults, is related to the degree to which they are aware of the underlying phonological structure of words. In other words, when we learn how to read, we have to do it sound by sound. We are learning how to take the sounds of spoken language and associate them with the letters in print. That's how we learn how to read. And that's not just something that's an opinion. I will show you. That is something that now has been well researched through functional MRIs. And this is very cool. And this is where that concept of the science of reading comes in, because they are researchers such as Stanislaw Dehaene, who's a French researcher, and you'll hear his adorable accent in a moment. But they're through functional MRI studies, they can actually see how the brain learns how to read. It is very, very cool. So let's just take a look.
I want to show you a sort of caricature that you can remember. And it's very simply that reading starts as any other visual stimulation in these generic visual areas of the occipital pole of the brain, but then very quickly moves into an area that we have discovered, which concentrates the recognition of the written word. I have called it the brain's letterbox, because it is where we store our knowledge of letters. And from there, what you have seen is this explosion of activity into at least two networks, one that concerns the meaning of the words, and another that concerns the pronunciation and the articulation of the word. And so we can say essentially from the brain's point of view that learning to read consists first in recognizing the letters and how they combine into written words, and second, connecting them to these systems coding for speech sounds and for meaning. And what is rather remarkable is that all of the areas in orange and in green here already exist for spoken language. They are shared between spoken language and written language. I want to show.
So it's this connection of spoken language and written language that is what we call phonics. That's the connection to structured literacy, the other side of that rope that we just looked at. So that's what they're seeing when they're doing these functional MRI studies, which is beyond cool. But I can tell you from 40 years of teaching, phonics absolutely works. This is how I was taught how to teach. Then this whole controversial method about reading instruction came to be. It's too long for this our purpose is to discuss how that took hold, but it's really it's a remarkable story. If you want to learn more, there's a very cool podcast called Sold a Story, SOLD, Sold a Story by Emily Hanford that will reveals the history of these reading wars. But here we are on the side of science for the moment. We hope a long moment with regard to how kids learn how to read, and that is through this teaching kids the connection between letter sounds and the sounds of speech and the actual letters. And that is the power of phonics. So I want to just talk for a second about how important it's been in my teaching career. When I was a young teacher, I went to a school and I had 44 children on my resource room caseload. And I had the honor of being able to train our staff in a new structured literacy phonics approach. And I actually supported them as they implemented this form of instruction. And so in just 3 years, my caseload of 44 went down to 10. Our special needs referral rates went down by 75% district-wide. And in our school in particular, all students were reading according to their ability by the time they got to 3rd grade. So it was a remarkable success. And the way we did that, not just teaching phonics, but we looked for every decodable book, which we'll start to talk about what are they, that we could get our hands on and including decodable workbooks. And they were so important to my teaching. In fact, I have them up there in that cabinet. But those books were so important to my teaching that when our school burned down in July, which, didn't serve the kids well, but who always wish that their school would burn down. But this happened in the summer. That's my resource room at the top left-hand side. And the very next day after they put the fire out, I literally asked the fire marshal if he could help me get my decodable books, which I literally have right there, the white spines to this day. That's how important they are to me. So let's look at the research a little bit more and talk about how Professor DeHaan's findings relate to young readers. So what he was talking about leads to two important findings, which are in fact predictors of learning how to read in young children. The first one is how well you know phonics, how well you understand the sound systems of language. Really, what we should say is how well you've been taught phonics, because you don't just pick it up. And the second thing, which is so important for librarians, and you are telling this to parents all the time, how large is the size of their spoken vocabulary? If they know a large number of words, they will learn to read faster. And that's because of that little that part of the brain that Professor Dahan was talking about, which recognizes the sounds when they see the letters. It's almost like I call it like an auditory bell going off, like a ding. Like if you can sound out like p, g, and say it fast, pig, and you know the word pig, oh, pig. It's quick because it's in your spoken language. But if you sound out a word that you may never have heard before, like kids in like who live in a rural area who sound out the word like cab, cab, and maybe they've never heard of a cab, that would cause some hesitation. So how large your spoken vocabulary is, in other words, telling parents, read to your kids, read to your kids, read to your kids from like the youngest age possible, that helps build that large spoken vocabulary, which is so helpful in terms of learning how to read. So there's this concept, it's called the alphabetic principle. And it's the underpinnings of what phonics is, which is connected to the decodable books we're going to be talking about. So basically, the alphabetic principle is the understanding that there are systematic and predictable relationships between written letters and spoken sounds. Now, that's important. This concept of systematic and predictable. So one of the criticisms about teaching phonics is like, oh, there's too many irregular words. Well, there's really not. This is how predictable it is. 85%. And I know that if I could do anything with 85% predictability, like maybe play the lottery, I would be doing it. So in other words, it's a good use of our time to be teaching something that's 85% predictable. And how do kids learn this predictable alphabetic principle? It is, in fact, phonics instruction, which helps children learn the relationship between letters of written language and the sounds of our written language and the sounds of our spoken language. So let's dig in a little bit and start to really look at these books. These are some of my favorite decodable books. Right here, this book, Is It So? That's the cover of one of the books that I saved, well, after the fire. We're going to look at this book called Help Us from the Magic Belt series. That's from a publisher called Phonic Books, sold by DK, Penguin Random House. Wonderful series. There's another nice book called Skunk Dog. It's through Heggerty. And then there's a sweet series called Flyleaf. That's at the end. It is Halloween. And then far left is one of the Whole Phonics books. When I talk about decodable books, it's really important for me to talk about what I consider to be high quality decodable books. So I'll be mentioning many publishers. So, and if you ever would like to know other possible publishers, I'll be happy to share. We want to make sure that children have choices. So of course, we're going to talk about as many publishers that follow what I consider to be a gold standard in decodable books. And we'll talk about that. There's one more, Are We There Yet? I forgot to mention, which is by a publishing company called PAF. Okay, so here's what we need to know about decodable text. I think this is probably the most important slide. The way decodable text works is that there's something called a scope and sequence, and that is the list or the organization of instruction of these sounds. So I hope I've convinced you by now that we have to teach the kids the sounds that go with the letters. And we do that in a very systematic way because we have to do it so in a very direct and systematic way so they can learn it, absorb it, practice it, hold on to it, and then retrieve it for reading. And for some kids, a little bit of that instruction, they can somewhat move quickly. Other kids, they need it a ton of repetition. And considering that our reading scores are as low as they are, we probably need a lot more repetition than is currently being provided in schools. That it's the repetition that helps to really sink what we call this concept of orthographic mapping, like Professor DeHaan talked about, mapping the sound to the letter. That takes a lot of repetition. But let's go back to this code to text match concept, which is like in our first book in level 1, Zach's Pal, the sounds you need to know to read that book are these sounds in the box. We've also taught kids 5 sight words, high frequency words, which is, no, the, and okay? That's 4, but there's a 5th one. It's just not in this book. Every other word they can sound out using these letters, the short A and these consonants. That's what a pure decodable book does. It is committed to that scope and sequence. So you will not find, oh, there's the other word, on. You will not find a word on this page that hasn't been explicitly taught either as a high frequency word or through the sounds. That's how tight this is. There's 2 reasons for that tightness. Number 1, we have to teach the code and we have to teach it well. So we don't want to muddy the waters with code that we haven't taught. And the other reason is for many kids, that's frustrating. So if I'm putting a book in front of a beginning reader, and this is oftentimes fun, but sometimes for some kids a bit daunting, I'm able to say, hey, everything I've taught you, you know everything you need to be able to read this page. We've taught you everything. So it's basically no surprises, and which is very important. So hold on to that. We'll get to that in a second. And then it goes on from there, like even throughout the curriculum. Now we have all 5 of our short vowel sounds and all our consonants. Whoops. So you can see this is the last book of our level 1 where there's 15 books to teach all the short vowels. But look at how here we've got the short E. This is teaching the short E in this book, but look at all this: 10 and hens and wet and web and well. All of these words to like really help learn that new sound. But we also are going back and reviewing the old, constantly reviewing the old to make sure that those sounds are solidified. The short vowels represent about 50% of the sounds in the English language syllable structure. Like almost 50% of our words, of our syllables, contain a short vowel. That's how important they are. So we've got to make sure that we are teaching them well so kids can retrieve them for when they get to a word when they're older, or as they grow up, like fantastic. So they can break those words into syllables and apply those short vowel sounds. And any other words like the word want or said or she that don't follow that pattern, again, those words have been explicitly taught with a lot of practice as high frequency words. We want to make sure that we are teaching those high utility, high frequency words. Those words like the Dolch list. I don't know if you've heard of the Dolch list, but there's 300 words that represent 65% of the words that are in books. Those words are powerful. So we want to teach those words, especially if they don't follow our phonetic pattern. We want to make sure that we teach them very systematically and get that high frequency word list or knowledge moving along as well. So decodable text or decodable books is text designed with the code in mind. In other words, we have this code to text match with an explicit scope and sequence. Most of the words follow the scope and sequence unless they're the high frequency words. And these this concept is the foundation of decodable text, decodable books. Now, we're gonna talk right now about what is not a decodable book. So I don't know if any of you are old enough like I am in my 60s to remember reading Dick and Jane, but these books were written based on the idea that if you see the same word enough, you will memorize it. But that's not how we learn how to read. We don't learn how to read from memorizing. We learn from understanding the sound to print correspondence. So this is why Dick and Jane has come and gone. But it looks like this could be a simple, easy to read book, but there are so many phonetic patterns that you need to know to read this book. So you need to know short U, you need to know short O, you need to know short I for Dick, you need to know short E for get, you need to know short A for that. If they didn't learn all this and someone asks them just to read this, or even reading like the TH, all these THs, if they haven't been taught TH, then this is going to be an exercise in frustration because we don't learn how to read by memorizing. There's a whole bunch of high frequency words too, like said and come and for and you. Want, were those taught explicitly? Those are words that we can't sound out. So this is, as you become purveyors of knowledge in terms of what makes a good decodable book, I'm showing you what doesn't make a good decodable book. Secondly, this idea of predictable reading. I went walking. What did you see? I saw a brown horse looking at me. The next page. I went walking. What did you see? I saw an elephant looking at me. Those are delightful books to read with children, but not to use as teaching tools to help them learn the code because they're not designed for that, those predictable books. And the other thing to be aware of, now that decodable books have become so ubiquitous, so much more popular, there are a lot of people just slapping on phonics onto the front of a book because, as you know, as I said, our language is 85% predictable. So you could say, well, it's phonics because our language is predictable. And look, I put all these short A words, hash and bad and trash can and bad, in this book. So I can say it's a phonics book. But in terms of the code to text match, unless you've learned how to read a word like lady or your silent E, or you've learned like in makes, or you've learned how to read words with blends like smells, or that INK says ink, unless you've learned these things, just knowing the short A alone, which is often the first sound taught, is not going to enable you to read this book. So when you're looking at different decodable text series, you want to really look and think, what is the scope and sequence? And we'll talk about that in a second. And how closely does the decodable book match the publisher's scope and sequence? And I would like to put in a little bit of a plug for making sure that your books are engaging. This little story here, Mop the Van, this is one of the reasons why I decided to start writing my own books, because I had students crying when we put these kinds of highly decodable books in front of them without a picture and without a story that made a lot of sense. So you can see, look at how decodable this is. It's all these 3-letter words with those short vowels. That's really well done. But unless the book is also engaging, that I would not recommend that for a beginning reader, because we want to make sure that they understand the purpose of learning how to read is for something that's meaningful and joyful, engaging, fun. So now, if we want to teach the code, we need decodable books. And we're going to start looking at what are the features of what I call gold standard decodable text, because I just showed you all those examples of what wouldn't be considered decodable texts. So now that we know how kids learn how to read, what are the other aspects that we have to look at beyond the phonics, and how does that apply to decodable books, but how do we carefully choose our decodable books in general? So let's look at the first feature, is that these decodable books follow this strict scope and sequence. So let's look and see what that's all about. So these are the back covers of three different units from Whole Phonics, and they're all organized by color coding. So level 1 has this green spine, and you can see it exactly what is meant to be taught, the short vowels. So there's 3 books for short A, 3 for short I, etc. In level 2, organized by a blue spine, we're teaching our digraphs, 3 books to address the CK. And you can even see it in the titles, A Sick Rock, Get the Sock. Then, the H digraphs are coming. Rod Loves Math, Zach's Bath, The Thick Fog. So these books are dedicated to the instruction of that sound, as well as the cumulative repetition of every sound previously taught. As I explained, we need to make sure that those kids see those sounds enough so that they are really embedded in the brain's letterbox, which Professor DeHaan refers to. Level 3 is these glued sounds of ing and ink, ang and ank, and then our beginning blends, and it goes on. We got earlier and later books in the series. But most importantly is when whatever series you're choosing, look for the scope and sequence and look to see if the words reflect what's being taught. Here's that series that I talked about earlier, Flyleaf, and you can see how they tell you exactly what their scope and sequence is, what they're trying to teach, and then what books are connected to that scope and sequence. Every publisher of decodable books should have a scope and sequence readily available. So that's one piece. Now, there's an important concept in reading instruction that is beautifully represented through this reading rope called Scarborough's reading rope. And the top part of the rope talks about what Professor DeHaan was talking about in particular, like how the brain learns to decode, how the brain learns to make this connection. And that's the decoding and the phonics and the high frequency sight word recognition. But of course, to be a good reader, the whole goal of reading is to obtain meaning. And that's the other aspect of decodable books that I want to talk about. What else do we need in a decodable book to make sure that all aspects of these strands of learning how to read are covered? So the first feature, as we said, follows a strict scope and sequence. The next presents a meaningful story. So I've heard stories since decodable textbooks became this big thing about companies who, wanted to get on the bandwagon, hired a bunch of writers, gave them word lists, phonics word lists, and put them in a room and said, go write books. The books that came out were, a pig is on a log, a pig is on a wig, a pig is on a can, a pig is in a pit. Yes, that might be decodable, but it doesn't tell a story. When kids learn how to read, they should know why they're reading, and that it's to learn story structure, to learn that books have this narrative arc, so they are engaged and they're wondering what's going to happen. Can I make predictions? I want to find out how the problem gets solved. That's the essence of a good book. I don't need to tell this wonderful group of librarians that, but be on the lookout. Just because it says it's a decodable book, look inside, read, and see if the story makes sense. Too many times it doesn't. So let's look at a story that actually does make sense, so we can talk about what that means in conjunction with the phonics piece. Okay, so can you still see? I hope that you guys can see this book? Can someone just say, yes, we can
Yep.
see the book?
Yeah, we
Okay,
can
good.
see it, Jill.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Okay. So this is one of the books, the Whole Phonics books, and I'm going to read it to you rather quickly. But I will start by showing you, and this is actually something really important for your patrons, and any series that you choose should have something like this to show parents, what are the sounds being covered? What are the sight word, high frequency words that you need to know? If the book is meaningful, it should have a summary, and there should be reading comprehension questions. So in this book, and we often talk about the title first, Get Up, when we're teaching kids and we're teaching them how to make predictions about the book based on the title. But here, here you'll see all of those. This is, as you see here, it's the shorty that we're teaching, so you'll see plenty of words that have "eh" in them. But let's start to read and then look for the problem and you'll see how kids would get engaged to find out what would happen. So Meg is in bed. She will not get up. Meg loves to be in bed. Mom tells Meg, get up. The cat has to be fed. Well, there's the cat. But Meg tells Mom, and the title of the book certainly gave us a clue. Not yet. I love my bed. So she is not getting up. Mom tells Meg, get up. Jet has to be fed. Meg yells, I am not well. Keep, as we read, note how strict the decoding is to what they've already learned. And every single other word that doesn't follow that pattern was in the front of that book, the front cover, like you. You are well, Meg. You have to get up. Meg yells, but Mom, I have a bad leg. I cannot get up. Mom yells, get up, Meg, or I will get mad. And apparently so will Jet the cat. And Meg is just still full of excuses. But Mom, I'm hot. I have big red dots. I cannot get up. And this is when you start asking your students or, parents who are talking to kids, like, do you think she's going to get up? What's Mom going to do? Mom was mad. She yells, you do not have red dots. I am so mad. I will not beg you to get up. But Mom will not beg, but Jet will. Meg, I'm sad. Will you get up for me? Jet begs. And for so many kids who have pets, let's see if she's going to get out of her bed for her beloved pet. Be my pal. I have to be fed. Get up, Meg, Jet tells Meg. And of course, we love our pets. We'll get up for our pets. Meg gets up. Meg loves Jet. The cat has to be fed. I love my cat. The cat is fed. Meg and Jet are in bed for a nap. Meg and Jet love the bed. But then one more problem. Dad yells, Meg, you have to fix the cat's mess. Get up. Jet's mess is on the rug. And when I gave the artist directions to draw this page, I envisioned that it was going to be a mess around the cat's bowl, but he had a different idea of mess. And I asked a number of teachers if I can leave this little mess, and I got the thumbs up. So anyway, do we have to get up to fix the mess? We can have a nap and a hug in my bed. And so that's what they do. Meg will fix the mess, but not yet. It's so fun to hug Jet. So you could see that's a full story, engaging. We shouldn't be asking kids to read anything but a full story. Also, I just want to show you, remember I said that you should be able to ask the publisher, where's your scope and sequence? Our scope and sequence is in the back of the book. It's also on our website. Every publisher should give you immediate access to the scope and sequence so you can see how dedicated those decodable books are to adhering to their own scope and sequence. Okay, so now we're back to my PowerPoint. And if we're not, let me know. Okay, so like I was saying, the reading comprehension questions indicate that this is a story that's meaningful. So we have the gold standard decodable text presents a meaningful story along with a strict scope and sequence. Also, as I said earlier, some kids need a lot of repetition. So look for that in any series that you choose. Some books only have one book that might teach like a TH, So that's why you would probably want to have multiple series in a decodable text collection. So there's multiple options for kids or families to find those books with the skill they need to learn. So yes, repetition, repetition, repetition is another gold standard feature. Here's a book where you can see, this is this Hegarty series, that skunk book, where you can see that they tell you that they are clearly teaching the magic E, the silent E, because there's drive and home and drive again. But they also have words from the past, like the short vowel sounds. So good. We want to see that repetition. Okay, so next, minority representation. So we do know, librarians know this better than most, that minority representation in children's books is terribly lacking. And in 2018, only 10% of children's books published depicted African American characters, and 6% of books published in 2017 depicted Latino characters. Um, I I think the person who says it best in terms of that those terrible statistics is Grace Lynn, when she mentions that what your child reads sets the path for their own self-worth as well as how they see others. So as you're reviewing different series, to make sure that kids can see themselves, I love this page. This is a Whole Phonics book. Just you can see the variety of representation here, and it's it's kids need to see themselves and to know that they have value in the books that they read. And finally, they should be enjoyable. To think otherwise, I know I'm talking to librarians, I don't have to convince you. So, and I will say, some kids, really prefer nonfiction, and it's very hard to write nonfiction early on because it's hard to stick with the code. It's hard to use use that explicit phonics code to represent nonfiction topics. But here's a series called Phonic Books. I told you about this one from DK that has, some, this certainly is a fantasy, but I like how they have pictures. You'll see if you look further, but the pictures are more realistic. Not, they're both cartoons, but they have backgrounds that are more realistic. And they now have some books that are more that are nonfiction in their collection. So, of course, for young kids who, those some kids who don't like stories, who are not comfortable with stories, if they're still learning how to read, they're going to need to read books like this, but we'll make sure that we read nonfiction to them. Okay, so here are all our features. And just as we're getting close to wrapping up, I'll share with you as well that there's not we need more research about the importance of decodable books, decodable texts, but there is some solid evidence about why we should be using it, especially related to what we know about how the brain learns how to read. But there's a researcher, Heidi Mesmer, and she summarizes 3 reasons. And she says we have to bridge this important developmental transition into word reading. And I would say, rather than use the word bridge, we look at decodable books as a springboard. It's the place where they get started and then can spring into more authentic text. They are a field for the transfer of this letter sound knowledge. It's where you can apply that phonic knowledge. And we want to encourage and empower beginning readers to decode. I'm sure every one of you still comes upon a word that you've never seen before in print. It's always very delightful when that happens. And you sound it out. So we have to make sure kids have that skill. And that's what teaching phonics is. I mean, they're going to need it in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade when the text is denser, when they're reading more nonfiction. There's plenty of words that they're still learning at those ages. Okay. And then this is basically the research behind why we need to teach kids how to, apply the sounds and map them. It's this concept. If any of you get like excited by this topic, read more about orthographic mapping. It's the skill that it's exactly what we're doing when we're teaching phonics. We're making that sound to symbol connection. And this I hope you can take a screenshot of this, because to me, this is why those qualities, these gold standards that I've spoken of are so important. One of my favorite research studies is by this Castle's Racial and Nation trio. They wrote a piece in 2018 called Ending the Reading Wars, and they look at reading acquisition, as it says, from novice to expert. But there is sometimes this heavy emphasis on phonics. But what they're saying is we have to go beyond that. And that goes back to that rope I showed you. We have to make sure that children understand that we are reading for meaning. And what they say is if we're only teaching them the phonics, they're saying that's like barking at print. So, reading aloud robotically without understanding. So it's the reason why we want to make sure that the books are meaningful, not just meant to teach these phonics skills. Now, here comes something fun. Remember earlier on, I said to you when I finished that chapter and submitted it in 2018, I didn't even mention decodable books in my own chapter. And here, largely because of learning more about the science of reading, and I'm going to say that woman Emily Hanford, who is the force behind this podcast called Sold a Story. She's a reporter. She has been, this interest in phonics became so prolific in the United States, and I know in Canada as well, because I've been working with the folks who put together the Ontario Right to Read project. We've been communicating over the years, and this is very exciting. This is from an organization called Teach My Kid to Read. It's a nonprofit in the United States, which would be an amazing, amazing nonprofit for you to know about, because they are dedicated to helping librarians know more about decodable books, how to shelve them, how to share them with patrons, how to educate the community about them. But look at the growth in the number of libraries. That's according to their data, using decodable books. So, and I know it's grown remarkably since then. So this was back in 2021. So I'm going to have to find an updated bar graph. And here's another library for you to check out. And this library, they've been doing this for 10 years. So this is Richland, South Carolina Public Library. 10 years ago, they were onto this concept of having an education studio with books to help children learn how to read. And so they have our books. Our books are in the top 15 most checked out books in the library. But part of the reason that they're so popular is that the librarians are committed to helping the community know we have books here to help your children learn how to read. And of course, libraries are the great equalizer. So for families who are struggling to find help for their children to learn how to read, it's the library that we want them to turn to find these books, to find what they need to help their children when the school sometimes, unfortunately, fails them. So I encourage you to go look up Richland, South Carolina Education Studio. You will see their videos, their resources. It is so exciting to know that libraries, I see them as a beacon to follow. This is this really incredible moment of finding a way to make libraries even more treasured in the community as a place of support. Again, here's this is a picture from Teach My Kid to Read, where you'll find more information about how to introduce a new literacy hub to your community. Different books, different ideas. You'll find information about how to organize your new decodable book collection. You can see some of the different books that I've mentioned. There's the phonics books right there underneath the little Zach stuffed animal next to our books. There's the Hegarty book, that Magic Pearl. So Some of those books I've mentioned are right there. And there's certainly no one correct way to organize your books, but I would strongly suggest, as you see here, you keep them together because parents will read one book after another because that scope and sequence is the thread through the decodable books. So they learn one sound, then the next, and the next, but they're reviewing and reviewing. So they should be going through the series one after another. And here's something else for you to hopefully take a screenshot of. The first is from ALA. It's a Facebook group for librarians who have questions regarding programming, just general questions. And sometimes I've seen things regarding decodable books. But Teach My Kid to Read, I mentioned them. But the other thing that they now started in the last, I think maybe 3 months, is this community literacy solutions for the library community. And I see emails coming through that thread all the time with questions about decodable books, organizing, sharing with parents. There's the Richland Public Library website. And then if you want to learn more about how children learn how to read, especially those who struggle, there are 2 websites, understood.org and Dyslexia, the International Dyslexia Association. And with that, I will end by saying, as important as decodable text is, decodable books are, these are the books that are the most fun. But in order to get to be able to read these books, we have to make sure children learn how to read. So I'm hoping, of course, that children are that parents are reading these fabulous books to their kids when they're not yet able to read. And one day they'll be able to read a beloved book that they heard when they were young. And now they're 5 or 6 and they pull it out of their, bookshelf or take it back out of the library because they loved it so much and now they can read it themselves. So there's my email if you have any questions. And I see that I ran a little late and I apologize. And thank you all for listening.
Jill, that was unbelievable. This
Happy to share.
Oh, honestly, like you gave me goosebumps. I just
Oh,
can't
good.
believe all the information I'm sure everybody here listening was just riveted. I was just amazed
Oh, I'm
at
so happy
everything
to
you
hear
had
that.
to say. And you read about decodable books, and I try to educate myself as best I can. But having you explain certain things in the way you did, it just clicked. And I
Good.
can't thank you enough for that.
Good. I always say, as long as one person got something out of a webinar, I'm happy. So there's one, and I hope that everybody else,
I don't know if
interest.
anybody has any questions. Public libraries serve a wide range of readers. Do you think that these books could potentially help older readers to learn how to read?
So, of course, we want to honor the place where an older reader's at, right? So I wouldn't want to use my books, for example, with kids older than about 5th grade, unless they may be developmentally delayed. And, I've had teachers tell me their 8th and 9th graders get a giggle out of them, but those are children in special needs classrooms.
Mhm.
The good news is that there are more publishers who are writing books for older kids, like that Phonic book series, for example. There's
Right.
another series called Tumbleweed. That's new in the last like 6 months to 8 months, and the author is really focused on older kids.
Okay, perfect.
So the fact is, we have too many kids who can't read, and most of the reason why they can't read is because they don't know the code. So we still have to teach them the code no matter what age they're at. There's people who are working on going into prison systems and teaching phonics there's a high level of illiteracy in prison systems, especially in the US. And there's people who have written books for older adults who are, to help them learn how to read. And the unifying component to what we need to do to help these people learn how to read is phonics, But of course, we want to make sure that we're honoring where each person is at, and we wouldn't put like a little like whole phonics book in front of an adult.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, that's a good point. But yeah, you've given a lot of us, I'm sure, lots of things to look into, and I can't thank you enough. And I just want to thank everybody who joined us today. And we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to
You're
come to our
welcome.
webinar.
You're welcome. There was a question about it's tumbleweed. I see a question. It's tumbleweed. Somebody asked about that. And the difference between decodable books and leveled books. The leveled books are designed mostly for children to do something called a 3 cueing system, which is what I mentioned about, use the picture to figure out the words, use beginning sounds to figure out the words, or try to figure out the word based on the meaning of the sentence. That's how those books were written. So they weren't written with the phonetic code in mind. That's the leveled book. Somebody asked, what's the difference between decodable books and leveled books?
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure they're not written with the code in mind. They're written with that. It's with more of a guessing based on that whole language side of the rope that I was mentioning.
Right, right. Um, and just a quick reminder, for everybody who registered for the session, you'll receive the recording by email and you can share it with your colleagues. Um,
Somebody's asking, I have a difficult time shelving as I do want to keep them all together. We have 2 levels in the library that splits up the titles. Downstairs is 5 and under, upstairs and 6 and up. How important is it to keep these together?
You know, it's funny. I said to Nikki and Tanya that the library specific questions I will not be able to answer, but I feel like each library and its layout is unique in terms of keeping the books together. If it's a series, I would keep it together. Like all the tumbleweed books, for example, I would keep together because the parents should be going through one after another after another. But if you have decodable books for young kids, like just the beginning readers, and then you also have decodable books for kids who are like fourth grade and up, third, fourth grade and up, it's, for older kids. If they are on different floors because it's the ages are that distinct in the library, that makes sense to me that you might do that. But I definitely would want to make sure that in each place, there's a sign that says there's more decodable books downstairs or more decodable books upstairs.
I have one last question. We struggle with a small paperback format. Any gold standard series in hardcover?
So what's interesting is we have people have asked us about that, like library binding, and what we found as publishers is that it's so expensive to do that hardcover binding, and then that cost gets passed on to the libraries. That like our soft cover is like the stock is hard and it's laminated, and I've been told that they're being like that. You might want to ask the Richland Public Library about this. Those books are going out again and again and again. So it's a cost thing. So I can't tell you. I think that Phonic Books did try to do hardcover, and they put all their books in one hardcover, and you might want to look into that. That's the only one I know that's done that.
and like I said, we'll put together like a little info sheet of all the things you've
Sure.
touched on, all the little
Thank
thank
you, everybody.
thank you again. Thanks
Yeah,
everybody for joining us.
yeah.
Thanks again, Jill.
Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day, all.
Bye.
Take care.